My grandfather's woodshop smelled like cedar and linseed oil and something else I could never quite name. Maybe just him. He'd been gone for 6 weeks when my uncle called, and I was still the kind of grieving where you open the fridge and forget why you're standing there. Just wanted to give you a heads up, Uncle Colt said. His voice had that particular smoothness he uses when he's already decided something and is just informing you of it. Dex is going to be using the shop for a while. He's got some projects lined up. I set down my coffee mug very carefully. The wood shop. Yeah, it just makes sense. He's local, he's got the skills. Grandpa left me the wood shop, Colt. A pause. Well, you know how Grandpa was. Sentimental. Dex actually uses tools, Ellie. What are you going to do, drive 3 hours every weekend? There it was. The same logic people use when they've already taken something from you and just want you to be gracious about it. I said I'd call him back. I didn't. I should explain who I am, because it matters to the rest of this. My name is Ellie Marsh. I'm 31 years old. I'm a forensic accountant. I work for a firm that gets hired when companies suspect internal fraud. I find the hidden money. I follow the numbers wherever they go. I'm methodical, patient, and I have been professionally trained to spot the things someone doesn't want me to see. My uncle knew my job title. He apparently forgot what it meant. My grandfather, Hank Marsh, built that woodshop with his own hands on a half-acre lot in rural Tennessee when he was 34 years old. He made furniture, real furniture, hand-jointed, no pocket screws, no shortcuts. He sold pieces to people who drove from 3 states away and put them on waiting lists that stretched 2 years out. He also taught me to use a hand plane when I was 9, let me sand my first dovetail joint when I was 11, and gave me the shop on my 25th birthday in a conversation I still have memorized. You're the one who cares about the work, he'd said, handing me a mason jar of sweet tea. Not the money it makes, not what it looks like on the outside, the actual work. He'd nodded at the bench where he was finishing a walnut credenza. That's rare, Eleanor. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. His will was not ambiguous. The woodshop, the equipment, the lot it sat on, and the small storage building behind it were left to me. His longtime attorney had drafted it, witnessed it, and filed it 18 months before he died. My Uncle Colt was named executor. That last part is the thing that mattered. I drove to Tennessee the next morning. I didn't call ahead. The shop sits at the end of a gravel road lined with old tulip poplars. I'd driven it so many times the ruts felt like muscle memory. When I pulled up, I saw 2 trucks I didn't recognize and a flatbed trailer with a load of rough-cut lumber on it. Fresh lumber, like someone had been planning this for a while. The big roll-up door was open. Music was coming from inside. My cousin Dex was at Grandpa's workbench. He had a beer in one hand and was pointing at something on a laptop screen with the other, talking to a guy I'd never seen before. A belt sander I didn't recognize was plugged into the wall. So was a router table. Both new. Both not Grandpa's. Ellie. Dex looked up, and his expression did the thing where it tries to be casual but doesn't quite make it. What are you doing here? This is my shop, I said. He laughed. Actually laughed. Okay, look, my dad talked to you already. We figured you'd come around once you thought about it. You live in Nashville. You got your career. Who let you in? He held up a key. A brand new one. Shiny? The kind made at a hardware store. Dad had the lock rekeyed. Older locks, liability thing. You know how it is. I looked at the new belt sander. At the lumber on the trailer. At the guy with the laptop who was now very quietly closing it. I pulled out my phone and started filming. Slowly, methodically. The new lock hardware. The new equipment. The stranger in my grandfather's shop. My cousin's face. Hey, come on, Dex started. I'm documenting, I said. This is my property. You're here without my consent. That's trespassing. That's a little dramatic. Is it? I dialed the county sheriff's non-emergency line. I had already looked up the number that morning in the car. The deputy who came out was a woman in her 40s who listened to me, looked at the will documents I brought, looked at my cousin and said in the patient tone of someone who has done this before, that if the property legally belonged to me, the people inside needed to leave. Dex argued. His friend had already left. Dex eventually left too, the flatbed trailer rattling behind his truck down the gravel road. I stood in Grandpa's shop alone for the first time. It smelled the same. That was the thing that hit me, cedar and linseed oil, exactly the same, and underneath it somewhere the ghost of his work. I found a half-finished side table on the secondary bench, a piece of cherry he'd been working before he got sick. Still clamped, still waiting. I took pictures of everything, the new locks they'd installed, the new equipment they brought in, the 2 full cases of Dex's lumber still stacked in the corner. Over 150 photos before I was done. Then I drove back to Nashville and called a lawyer. The one I chose was a woman named Fern Okafor. She came recommended by a colleague at my firm, described as thorough and aggressive in the specific way that means she doesn't perform toughness, she just is that. I sat across from her in her office and told her everything. She read the will, read the executor documentation, and set the papers down with a look I recognized. The look you get when a case is cleaner than expected. "Your uncle is the executor," she said. "Yes." "And he rekeyed the property. Let your cousin move in equipment. Did so without your knowledge or consent. Without even telling me until after." She nodded slowly. "You said you're a forensic accountant?" "Correct. So, you're aware that your rights as beneficiary also give you access to the full estate accounting?" "Yes. I've been thinking about that since the drive back." She looked at me. "Do you want to just get the shop? Or do you want to know everything?" I thought about my grandfather's voice. The way he said, "Don't let her chop them down." Except that wasn't this story. That was just the feeling. That quiet warning underneath years of family dinners where Colt talked about land values and Grandpa changed the subject. "I want to know everything," I said. Fern filed the countersuit before Uncle Colt's attorney had time to build momentum. Their play was predictable. They filed a petition claiming Grandpa had shown signs of cognitive decline in his last 2 years, that he'd been unduly influenced by me during my visits, and that the bequest of the shop should be reviewed by the court. They put it in careful legal language that basically said, Eleanor spent too much time with him and confused a sentimental old man. I called my grandfather sentimental exactly 0 times in my life. I am not certain he was capable of being confused by anyone. Their lead attorney was a man named Roy, a family friend of my uncle's, who I'd met twice at holiday gatherings. He had the easy confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. He called me within 3 days of the filing. "Ellie, let's be smart about this. You're a professional woman, you've got a real career. We're talking about a woodshop. Your uncle's offering a fair market buyout, $65,000 for your interest. You can do a lot with $65,000. Buy yourself something you'll actually use." The phrasing was so precise in its condescension I almost wrote it down. Something you'll actually use. As if I had never built anything in my life. As if I hadn't cried in that shop 6 weeks ago pressing my forehead against the workbench while the sheriff gave my cousin time to gather his things. "Tell my uncle no," I said. "And tell him that, as the named beneficiary, I'm formally requesting the full estate accounting. Every account Grandpa had, every transaction for the last 10 years. He has 30 days under Tennessee law." Silence on Roy's end. Brief, but I heard it. That's standard procedure, of course. "We'll prepare that. I'd like it unredacted," I said. "All of it." The accounting arrived in 22 days, and it was the thing I had already suspected it might be. My grandfather was a careful man. He'd made good money over 50 years of custom furniture, invested it modestly and well, and lived without extravagance. His accounts at the time of his death should have reflected that. They did not. There were consistent monthly withdrawals from his primary checking account, $2,000 on the 14th of each month, going back 7 years. Transferred to an account I didn't recognize. I cross-referenced the account number against the estate documents and couldn't find it anywhere. It wasn't listed. I brought the statements to Fern. She looked at the transfers for a long time. "This account the money's going to, it's not in the estate." "No. Your uncle managed your grandfather's accounts? Added himself as a co-signer 8 years ago. Said it was to help with the bills since Grandpa hated online banking." Fern set down the papers. She had a very particular stillness when something significant landed. 7 years of $2,000 a month. That's over $160,000 going somewhere we can't account for. "There's more," I said. I slid another page across her desk. 3 years ago, Grandpa had a brokerage account. $42,000 in index funds, steady since 2009. On September 19th of that year, It was liquidated entirely. Power of attorney transfer. It went to a business account. I pointed to the name on the transfer. Marsh Custom Builds, LLC. Fern looked up. That's Dex's business, I said. My cousin, the one who was using the shop. She was quiet for a moment. That's not an oversight, Ellie. No. That's your uncle funding your cousin's business with your grandfather's retirement savings, while also pulling $2,000 a month into an account that isn't in the estate. I leaned back in my chair. The anger I felt by then was not hot. It was the cold kind, the kind that makes you very precise. My uncle told my grandfather the shop wasn't worth leaving to me, that I lived too far away, that I wouldn't use it. He spent years telling him that. I thought about the cherry side table still clamped to the bench. He was trying to move the assets to Dex piece by piece before the will even came into play. The shop was just the last thing. Fern closed the folder. We're going to subpoena everything. His personal accounts, the LLC, the co-signed accounts, all of it. I know. This isn't just a probate dispute anymore. I know that too. The mandatory mediation was held in a beige conference room with bad lighting and a mediator who introduced himself with excessive enthusiasm for someone sitting between two parties who genuinely despised each other. My uncle came in with Roy and a version of his face I'd never seen before, tight, watchful, nothing like the easy man who'd grilled ribs at Christmas and complained about property taxes. Dex sat beside him, staring at the table. Roy opened by calling the subpoenas a fishing expedition, and the countersuit a bad faith attempt to intimidate an elderly man's legitimate heirs. Fern let him finish. Then she slid a single page across the table. It was a summary. Clean, spare, numbers, and dates. This is the first batch of what we've pulled, she said, looking at my uncle. 7 years of $2,000 monthly transfers to an account not listed in the estate, $168,000. We'd like to understand where that money went. My uncle looked at the paper. His jaw shifted. We'd also like to discuss the September 2021 liquidation of $42,000 in securities transferred via power of attorney to Marsh Custom Builds, LLC. She paused. Which is your son's company? Roy put a hand on my uncle's arm, started to speak. That was a loan, my uncle said. His voice was tight. Hank agreed to it. It was a loan. We have no documentation of a loan agreement, Fern said pleasantly. No promissory note, no repayment schedule, no mention in any estate document. If you have documentation, we'd welcome it. Silence. The monthly transfers, I said. My voice was steady. I had rehearsed this. Not the words, just the steadiness. They started 8 months after you became co-signer on his account. $2,000 every 14th. For 7 years. That's not paying his electric bill. My uncle turned to me. Something crossed his face. Not guilt. Not yet. Something that looked more like fury at being seen. You have no idea what I did for that man. I was there. I drove him to his appointments. I handled his insurance. I managed everything while you were down in Nashville building your little career. You visited twice a year and acted like that made you his favorite. I visited, I said, because he wanted me to. Those are different things. He was an old man. He got confused. He didn't know what he was signing half the time. That is, Fern said, cutting in cleanly, a fascinating claim to make right now, given that you're currently contesting a will by arguing he was of diminished capacity, while simultaneously arguing that the transfers he signed off on were valid agreements. She let that sit for a moment. Which is it? The mediator cleared his throat. Roy leaned over and said something in my uncle's ear. Dex hadn't spoken. I looked at him. He was staring at the summary sheet. His face had the expression of someone doing math they hadn't expected to be doing. The mediation is not going to resolve this, Fern announced. We'll see you at the hearing. My uncle stood up so fast, his chair scraped back. You want to burn this family down over a woodshop, he said. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you. My grandfather, I said, kept every letter I ever sent him. In labeled folders. In the filing cabinet next to his workbench. 31 years of them. I picked up my bag. I have copies of all of them. He didn't have an answer for that. We left first. The weeks between mediation and the hearing were not quiet. My uncle's attorney filed 3 motions to limit the financial evidence, all denied. Someone, I couldn't prove who, drove past my grandfather's shop twice in 1 week at 2 a.m. My new trail cameras got good footage of the truck. It was registered to Dex. I sent the footage to Fern and filed a police report. Meanwhile, Dex stopped communicating with my uncle's legal team. I found out why when his attorney contacted Fern 10 days before the hearing. Dex wanted to talk. His own lawyer, not Roy. A new one he'd apparently hired himself. Brokered a meeting in a neutral location. A diner in a town that was equidistant between Nashville and the county where the shop was. He was already in a booth when I arrived, a cup of coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. I sat down across from him. I didn't know about the transfers, he said. Not hello, not preamble, just that. Tell me what you did know. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Dad said Grandpa wanted to invest in the business, said it was his way of helping. I thought, he stopped. I asked him once where the money was coming from and he said Grandpa's savings. I assumed that meant I don't know. Money set aside, not retirement funds. Not securities liquidated without Grandpa knowing. Dex's jaw tightened. I didn't know that part. I studied his face. I am professionally trained to evaluate whether a person's account of their own knowledge is credible. Your LLC received $42,000, I said. Did you ever talk to Grandpa about it directly? Did he ever bring it up? He looked at the table. No. Did that seem strange to you? A long pause. I told myself he just didn't like talking about money. He never did. He looked up. He talked about the business with me though, the furniture. He'd come by the shop and look at what we were building and he stopped again. His voice had changed. He never mentioned any investment, not once. That was all I needed to hear. I'm going to tell you what I told my grandfather's attorney 8 weeks ago, I said. There are 2 ways to walk into that courtroom. You can walk in beside your father and you'll be listed as a direct beneficiary of what the DA is going to call financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Or you can walk in and sit on the other side of the room. Your attorney has already contacted mine. You know what's on the table. Dex looked at his coffee for a long moment. He's my dad. I know. I didn't say anything else. It wasn't my job to make this easier for him. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was a small probate room with wood paneling and fluorescent lighting, the kind of room where ordinary people have extraordinary bad days. I sat beside Fern. My uncle sat across from us with Roy, who by now had the look of a man who had read the subpoenaed documents and understood exactly what he was attached to. When Dex walked in with his own attorney and took a seat in the gallery behind me, my uncle looked up. Their eyes met. I watched my uncle's face process it, the calculation, the revision, the thing collapsing behind his eyes. He looked away first. The judge was a retired circuit court judge brought in for complex probate matters. A deliberate, unhurried man who had clearly read every filing. He let Fern lead without interruption. She established the will's validity through testimony from Grandpa's attorney, a 73-year-old man who had known Hank Marsh for 40 years, and answered every question about his mental state with the exhausted precision of someone who could not believe this was being questioned. He was sharp, the attorney said. Sharper than most people I've drafted documents for at half his age. Fern presented the letters. Not all of them. She chose 12, spanning 15 years, each one dated and signed in my grandfather's handwriting, each one relevant. She read 4 of them aloud. The courtroom was very quiet. Then she turned to the financial records. She laid it out over 40 minutes. The 7 years of monthly transfers, totaling $168,000, deposited into a savings account in my uncle's name that had never been disclosed as an estate asset. The liquidation of $42,000 in retirement securities, transferred to the LLC, a series of smaller payments, equipment purchases, a truck, a home renovation on my uncle's property, all drawing from accounts my uncle had co-signed access to. $210,000. Gone, not in the estate. My uncle's new attorney, Roy, had found a conflict and quietly stepped back 2 weeks prior, objected several times. The judge overruled him each time with the same patient phrasing, proceed. Then Fern called Dex. He walked to the stand looking like a man going somewhere he'd made himself go. He told the truth about what he knew and what he hadn't known and where the money had gone once it reached his LLC. He cried once, briefly, when Fern asked him if he believed his grandfather had knowingly chosen to invest in the business. He said no. He said he thought if Grandpa had known, he would have just told him directly. That was the kind of man he was. My uncle made a sound from his seat. His attorney put a hand on his arm. The judge did not appear surprised by any of it. He read his ruling from notes he had clearly prepared, which meant he had already seen where this was going. The petition to contest the will is denied, he said. The will is valid in its entirety. The shop, the lot, and the attached storage building are the sole property of Eleanor Marsh. He awarded full legal fees against the petitioners. He awarded punitive damages of $45,000 for what he called a filing made in bad faith to conceal the financial exploitation of a deceased person. Then he looked at my uncle. In 30 years on the bench, he said, I have seen people do many things for money. What I find particularly troubling here is the use of a vulnerable position, a cosigner, a family member, a trusted person, to systematically drain an elderly man's accounts over nearly a decade, and then to use that same man's death as an opportunity to continue by invalidating the will he left behind. He paused. I am referring this matter in its entirety to the district attorney's office. The financial records, the testimony, and all subpoenaed documentation. I'd encourage everyone relevant to make sure their affairs are in order. The gavel came down. My uncle sat very still. He was arrested 4 months later, at home, early in the morning. Felony financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Theft, over $10,000. Breach of fiduciary duty. His name was in the local paper. His wife called me once to tell me I had destroyed the family, and I let her say everything she wanted to say. And then I said that her husband had been stealing from her father-in-law for 7 years and asked if she'd like to discuss who had done the destroying. She hung up. I didn't call back. Dex cooperated with the DA fully. He returned everything from the LLC that could be traced, which was more than I expected. The pink convertible was his, not my cousin's. Wrong story. Different life. His was a truck and a table saw and a hydraulic lift he'd bought for the shop. Those went back. His immunity agreement required a year of probation and full financial restitution for what he'd received. He called me once, a few months after sentencing, not to ask for anything, just to say he'd started working for a furniture restoration outfit in Knoxville. That he'd been thinking about what Grandpa used to say, about the work being the point. He said that to me too, I told him. Yeah, a pause. He was right. It was not a reconciliation, it was just honest. Maybe that's enough. I used the punitive damages to do 2 things. First, I paid to have a conservator assess every piece of equipment in the shop and restore what needed it. The new belt sander my cousin had brought, that went. Everything else was Grandpa's, maintained or repaired. Second, I commissioned a local mill worker to help me finish the cherry side table that had been sitting clamped to Grandpa's bench. I told him I wanted to finish it the way Grandpa would have, which meant hand-cut mortise and tenon, no shortcuts. It took 3 weekends. The table is in my apartment now. Cherry goes darker with time and light. In 10 years it'll be the color of old brick. Grandpa knew that when he started it. He was thinking about the future even then. I go to the shop most weekends now. The drive is 3 hours and I don't mind it. There's a learning curve. His systems, his organization, the particular order he kept things in, all of it makes more sense the longer I work there. I've started a commission list of my own. Small things. A walnut box. A set of floating shelves in white oak. People find me through word of mouth, which is how he always did it. My grandmother's neighbor stopped by last fall. A woman in her 80s who'd known Hank Marsh for 30 years. She stood in the doorway of the shop for a long time looking around. Then she said, "You move like him." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She nodded back and left. The grief doesn't go away. I don't think it's supposed to, but in the shop it has somewhere to put itself, into the grain of the wood, into the patience a good joint requires, into the particular quiet that comes at the end of a long day's work when everything smells like cedar, and the light is going and you've made something that will still exist after you're gone. That's what he gave me, not just the shop, all of it, the proof, the letters, the trust. He knew what was happening around him. He knew who was paying attention and who wasn't, And in the end, the most precise, most methodical thing he ever built wasn't furniture at all. It was a record. A true and irrefutable record of who his granddaughter was. I keep it safe. That's my job. I've thought a lot about what my grandfather actually left me. Not the shop itself, though I think about that too. Every weekend I drive the 3 hours out and unlock that door. What I mean is the other thing. The thing underneath the woodshop, underneath the will. Underneath all of it. He left me proof that patience is not the same thing as passivity. I was the quiet one my whole life. The one who read, who kept records, who remembered things nobody else thought were worth remembering. My uncle looked at that and saw weakness. He saw someone who could be managed, moved aside, handed a check, and told to be grateful. He forgot, or maybe he never understood, that the people who pay attention are the most dangerous ones in any room. What happened to my uncle was not luck, and it was not magic. It was math. 7 years of $2,000 transfers don't disappear. $42,000 liquidated from a retirement account leaves a paper trail whether you want it to or not. He built something in the dark and expected it to stay there. But financial records are not opinions. They don't care what story you tell about yourself. They just sit there, patient, waiting for someone with the training and the motivation to look. I had both. There's something I keep coming back to, about Dex. He was not innocent. He benefited. He didn't ask hard enough questions. He let himself not know. But he made a choice in that courtroom that I don't think was easy. He walked past his father and sat behind me, and I think he will be measuring himself against that moment for the rest of his life. The choices we make when it costs us something real are the ones that define what we actually are, not what we say we are. My uncle made choices too. For 7 years he made a specific choice, every single month, to take something that wasn't his. Not out of desperation, he wasn't struggling. Out of a belief, I think, that he was entitled to it. That managing things gave him ownership of them. That the people who did the quiet, invisible work of caring, driving to appointments, sitting with someone while they got sicker, writing letters that got filed and kept, were owed less than the people who controlled the accounts. He was wrong. And the wrongness accumulated, the way it always does, until it was impossible to hide. I think about what my grandfather said to me about the work being the point. He meant furniture. He also meant everything else. The work of being honest. The work of being honest. The work of paying attention. The work of staying in your integrity even when nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. He did that for 81 years. He also documented it in letters and in legal filings and in the simple act of choosing clearly and on the record who he trusted with the thing he'd built. He gave me a woodshop. He also gave me a model for how to live. I'm still learning what that means. But I know it starts with doing the work right, keeping good records, and never letting someone tell you that the quiet, careful things you've spent your life building don't count for anything. They count. They count for everything. I have the paperwork to prove it.